Today, will Sean Strickland be able to strike a mighty blow for dogs and canines everywhere against Israel Adesanya? And Manel Kopp decides to take his own career in his hands and shine at the press conference. And the Pleasure Man. That's all that needs to be said about Anton Turkalj. Find out all of this and more on today's episode of Matter of Fact MMA. Let's go. Let's get into it. So, couple of things we want to touch on today. Pause. The press conference has happened. Sean Strickland goes in there and delivers Sean Strickland type banter against Israel Adesanya. We're going to touch on two things. First off, pause again. The other day they had it wasn't really the press conference, it was kind of like a soundbite type deal. I don't really know what it was called, but it was media day. That's what it was called. Where, they interviewed Sean Strickland. They also interviewed Israel Adesanya as well as other people on the card. Couple of key points. When they interviewed Sean Strickland, he did his typical crowd work where, he's making fun of different people in the crowd, how they're dressed, and, different things. Said a few lines, but it really seemed like to me that, Sean Strickland was he seemed like he's ready for the task. He did not seem like this moment was getting to him or it was engulfing him or, it was too big for him. He seemed like he's truly ready for the uphill battle that is facing one of the greatest middleweights of all time. He seemed to talk pretty well. Israel Adesanya came out. He did his own, press scrum, and he seemed to be pretty much your typical Izzy outside of Izzy's last fight week against the rematch against Pereira, where Izzy just seemed like he was out for blood. This Izzy seems a lot more calm, a lot more collected, talked about different, I'm assuming therapy work he's done to overcome different things in his life, different obstacles, and it talks about he's a much lighter person, much better person, much more grounded. I will say that in this single solo interview with Israel, it's like, bro, why can't you be like that all the time? Like, he seemed way more grounded, not as much main character syndrome, not as aggressive in a cringe way. He just really seemed like he was excited to be fighting there in Sydney and, spoke somewhat complimentary of Sean Strickland. And, and to Sean Strickland's credit, he even thanked Israel Adesanya for, helping him get his passport and basically making this fight happen for him. So I believe that this is a good kind of banter between two guys that don't like each other, but at the same time, it's not that Conor Khabib banter. You know what I'm saying? That Conor Khabib, that Conor Khabib banter between these two, it got a little dark. You know what I'm saying? It got a little dark. Like, you know what I'm saying? It was like, you want light meat or dark meat? It got dark meat for all my fried chicken eaters out there. If you understand what I'm talking about, your boy Matt chooses to go with the white meat when we're talking about chicken. You know what I'm saying? But anyway, that was a side tangent about fried chicken. Shout out to me because I live in Louisville, Kentucky, home of Kentucky Fried Chicken. Anyway, bro, back to this. So it was very interesting to see these two kind of, somewhat, like, you can tell there's some sort of level, somewhat of respect based out of how they were going at you. Not so fast. Because then we skip over to the press conference that went on pretty much in the middle of the night for us here in the U.S. And, Sean Strickland unleashes. I mean, Sean Strickland was riding in a box Chevy Caprice down the road, saw Israel Adesanya hanging out outside, and pulled out the strap, put it on the side of the door, and then just sprayed the block. I mean, he drive by the H out of Israel Adesanya. I mean, it was crazy. And he wasn't really saying a lot of things that haven't already been said about Izzy on the internet. Shout out to the MMA guru, who is just truly doing doing the Lord's work against, people like Israel Adesanya, so to speak. But he didn't really say a ton of things that we all, that you couldn't really already see about Izzy on the internet. What I did find to be very interesting was in all of his trash talk about Israel and whatever he does with his dogs and, whatever type of strange fixations he has with dogs. But, all the things that he said about him, I will say that when the dog stuff was coming up, it did seem like to me that Israel, he wasn't about that. Like, he seemed like he was prepared for all the other things that Sean Strickland was going to say about him, and he had somewhat of a comeback, or at least he could calmly brush it off and still look calm, cool, and collected. When Sean Strickland brought up things about the dog and whatever he did to his dog, and talked a little bit about the T-shirt he was wearing when he got into the octagon with Drickus, that was obviously against like his ex-girlfriend who he's been having some legal issues with, or she tried to sue him, or whatever went on there. I don't really want to speak on that, but nevertheless, those two times talking about his dog or whatever he does with dogs and talking about his ex-girlfriend, it did seem like those things Izzy just kind of stiffened up, but more so in I really don't want to talk about these things type way. It was almost like, I'm sure he knew that everything is fair game for Sean Strickland to talk about, but at the same time, it seemed like he was like, bro, I don't really want to go there. Like, please stop talking about that. So, that's interesting to see. I don't really think that anybody's going to go out there and get in Izzy's mind at this point. When you're talking about mind games, or you're talking about you're going to trick him out of his, of his game plan. I will say that it seemed like the tide is turning as far as fan support. If anything, a lot of people are definitely making fun of Israel Adesanya for all of his weird things that he has going on with dogs and girlfriends and race baiting and everything else. So there's a lot going on there, and it seems that the tide is turning, because as his press conference went on, more and more people were cheering for Sean Strickland and somewhat booing or not cheering for Israel Adesanya. In my opinion, I still think Israel Adesanya, of course, is going to go out there and win this fight. The only way I see Israel Adesanya losing, and the only person that I see that can beat Israel Adesanya in this juncture, is Israel Adesanya. And I believe that there has to come a tipping point where someone who is that confident, that cocky, and that arrogant, the scales kind of tip too far to one side. I've seen that so many times over the years with so many different fighters, including who I believe is a middleweight GOAT, being Anderson Silva. And I believe that Anderson Silva was so confident. He was so cocky. He knew he was the man. That when he went in there in the first fight against Chris Weidman, the scales tipped a little bit too far. And he really felt like he could go in there and play and do anything he wanted to, and was still going to beat Chris Weidman. And as history shows us, that didn't play out. And still to this day, I hate Chris Weidman. Nevertheless, in my opinion, if Izzy's going to lose this fight, it's going to be by his own hands. He's not like a showboaty guy, so he's not going to get in there and showboat like Anderson. But I do believe there is a world with everyone that is extremely arrogant and extremely cocky, that cockiness could manifest itself in being comfortable and being in the fight, being comfortable, maybe have a commanding lead over Sean Strickland, and feeling like, you can just kind of ride it out, you can kind of coast it out, and you can go ahead and win this fight. There might have been a touch of that when he lost to Alex Pereira in the first fight in the UFC. I kind of felt like Izzy was coasting, trying to make it to the end of that fifth round to kind of win by, to win by decision or by scorecard. So, you know, that's my opinion on that. I feel like if Izzy is going to lose this fight, he's going to lose this fight based out of his own hand, not by anything Sean Strickland did, not by anything that he said, and by no mind games that Sean Strickland might play. Nevertheless, on a side note, just a personal note, I'll say it once again, I'm not a fan of Sean Strickland, but it would literally, it would make everything for me if Izzy goes out there and takes that L to Sean Strickland. That would be the most hilarious thing, and possibly maybe finally could humble this dude to where he wouldn't always be cringe AF every time he's got to talk and every time he's got to do something. So that's a whole other side note. I don't think that that'll happen, but if Sean Strickland is able to pull it off, maybe I will become a fan. I doubt it, but that is what it is. So, a lot of wild stuff was said at the press conference, back and forth. Now, as I mentioned in my open, let's get to Manel Kape. Manel Kape, who is kind of somewhat gone under the radar this entire fight week so far, up until the press conference. And everyone has kind of talked about, his fight that he's going to have, and, is fighting someone, kind of fresh from the Contender Series, and, and all of this. And it's like, somewhat of a clone of Charles Oliveira is who he's fighting, somebody that fights out of the Oliveira camp also. But, and I'm sorry, I can't remember the guy's name. I'll put it down in the corner so you all can see it. Nevertheless, though, Manel Kape goes out there at the press conference and takes that spotlight and starts calling out Kai Kara France, or as DC used to joke, Kai Kara France. He starts calling this man out, who Kai Kara France pulled out of their fight due to injury. He exposes the hypocrisy of Coach Eugene Behrman, who went off on Dricus for pulling out of the fight, including Dana White going off on Dricus for pulling out of the fight. I mean, what do you want, bro? You gave him a 6-week turnaround, and he was injured in the fight that you just had to make between him and Robert Whittaker. Yeah, bro, he's going to pull out the fight, bro. He's injured. What do you want from him? Obviously, if it was an injury he could have worked through, he still would have went in there and fought. Nevertheless, he called out the hypocrisy, how Eugene Behrman went in and said all these crazy things about Dricus and how he doesn't deserve the shot now and all this, and you got to fight through it, but then you let Kai Kara pull out, and it's no big deal. It's like, yeah, Kai Kara pulled out, whatever. And obviously, he's there in the front row at the press conference. He ain't too hurt. He can walk. You know what I'm saying? So kind of is what it is. But Manel Kape went in on him. That riled up Izzy because that's his teammate. Izzy stood up. And this was the greatest thing ever because Manel Kape did not back down. 125-pounder, flyweight, started yelling at Izzy to sit, multiple explicitives, if that's the correct word. Kept yelling at him to sit down. Kept telling Israel Adesanya to sit down. Shout out to Manel Kape for doing that. He kept going off on him. He was actually trying to sun Israel Adesanya, which I am all for anyone that's going to sun him. So that was pretty cool to see. It was cool to see, as I've talked about in a lot of these videos, fighters that just don't sit there and play the background and understand you need to talk. You need to talk yourself into a better position in the UFC. It's a different game now. You need to be able to fight, but you also need to be able to talk. You need that mouthpiece, you know what I'm saying? You need that game. You got to spit that game to Dana, Hunter Campbell, Sean Shelby, all of them. So you can get what you need from the sport that you're risking your life for every fight. So it was good to see somebody go out there and really, man, forget the Sean Strickland Izzy stuff. It's my show. And it was good to see Manel Kape go out there and do that. And finally, let's move over to the Pleasure Man. Anton Turkalj, I believe, is how you say his name. All I can say is that a reporter asked the Pleasure Man why he's called the Pleasure Man, and the Pleasure Man responded with, "Ask Tyson Pedro after I beat him on Saturday night, and then also ask your wife." And what was hilarious is that newscaster, he kind of like disappeared, like that Homer Simpson meme where he disappears into the bushes. Like I don't even know what happened to that. Like what happened to that reporter? Did he off himself? Like what happened to him? Is he okay? Is he on watch? Like is somebody with him? Keep all the sharp objects away from that guy, because he definitely left and phoned his wife to find out why he called the pleasure man. But at the same time though, it was just such a pause moment. It was a double, triple, quadruple pause moment. Because it was just like, bro, what is going on? Because then he then said that Tyson Pedro was going to taste the pleasure man. Tyson Pedro, who I might add, his energy seemed a little bit off during the press conference. Like he seemed like he was angry the entire time, or he just wasn't feeling it. I don't know what his deal is. Normally, especially if he was fighting in Australia, he seems to be very jovial, very happy, very thankful. Not saying that he wasn't, but it's just his energy seemed off, and he didn't know what to make of the pleasure man comment. So that was just great. Nevertheless, man, we are cruising on towards UFC 293. It goes down this Saturday. I believe it would be Sunday in Australia, in Sydney. But it's going down. It is definitely a top-heavy card. It's a Pamela Anderson type card because it's top-heavy. And, kind of is what it is, man. We're going to see what happens. Like I said, I believe that if Strickland's going to win, it's going to be because Israel Adesanya beat himself. Pause. But we'll see how it all goes down. It happens this Saturday night, UFC 293. Please like, subscribe, comment. Trying to drive up the traffic a little bit on this channel so we can afford nicer things. You know what I'm saying? But nevertheless, I appreciate you guys for joining me for another episode of Matter of Fact MMA. And I'll check you next time. Peace.